cat right here. So my apologies about the late lecture post. There's been super busy. Just got a new car finally, so I can actually travel. Just fixed up my sister's car, fixed up my mom's car. Now my dad's car got issues, and it's just been ripping and running. Just worked July 4th last night at the fire department. That was super busy as well, so I haven't been able to get a chance to actually post. But now that we are here, now I can actually post and everything. So for the midterm, because I'm going over the 50s, 60s, 70s, I'm going to now push that back about a week. So that should definitely help everyone out for sure. And so just to get basically to pick up where we left off, and so we're going to pick up with basically the nuclear arms race. So finally, at this point, you have America testing nuclear or testing atomic power, atomic warheads, in like Bikini Atoll, stuff like that, Nevada, and so you also have now Russia testing atomic weapons. How did they get those? Well, during the Manhattan Project, you get Russian informants and agents who are infiltrating the U.S. Atomic industry, and so you get all these scientists who were part of the Soviets. They would come back and explain that information to the Soviets. So now the Soviets have that atomic information to develop their own warheads. Well, the U.S. is like, how the heck did they even get there? Well, you got people who are interested in communism. So they weren't exactly from Russia. They could have been people from Germany, Britain, the U.S., who were just interested in communist ideals. And then that kind of like that struggle for workers' power, and everyone's on the same page and stuff like that. And then the people are the ones that drive the economy. And they were really interested in that. So then that took a hold on on the social aspect. And so now you have the atomic arms race between the U.S. and the Soviets now. And so the Soviets kind of go a different route. So they use hydrogen as a way to create hydrogen bombs. But otherwise, now you get people who are scared. They're like, well, if the Soviets can now infiltrate the U.S. government and the U.S. military, now what? Now who are they? Are my neighbors communists? Are my student, or is my daughter, my son, are they communists? Who are they hanging out with? And so now you get the introduction to the Red Scare. And so the Red Scare essentially is just the U.S. is wanting to get rid of and eradicate as many people who are into communism as possible, to retain that democracy, to retain that capitalistic nature. So that's throughout the whole 40s, especially 50s, as well, late 40s, and especially 50s as well. But you do get the death of Stalin in 53. He had complications with hypertension, and then he had like a blood pressure of like 200 over 100 or 90 or so, which is reaching stroke territory, and which ultimately he did. He ended up passing away of a left-sided stroke. That was in 53, and then also Truman lost the presidency in 53 as well, because Eisenhower now becomes president. And so Eisenhower at this point, super religious guy. He used to like pray in his cabinets and everything, but also that plays a part in his presidency. So Eisenhower, he understood that idea of the battle between good and evil, and so he understood that the U.S. fight against communism with the Soviets is kind of like hand in hand with what he believed was good and evil, and so then he wanted to ramp up the arms race, atomic arms race, but also they developed a new way of atomic warheads, was the institution of, I believe, neurons. Yeah. So to use neurons as a way to shoot a neuron at those that atomic bundle or uranium, I assume, I imagine, and then that will cause that explosion. It will cause a mass chain reaction, which would in turn create a bigger explosion, i.e., a nuclear bomb. And so he wanted to ramp up production on nuclear warheads. He wanted to also use that as a way of diplomacy in order to scare his opponents. So then that way he can assure that he won't have to fight a nuclear war as well. He also came up with the fact that if any opponent were to conduct nuclear war on the US, then he would make sure there's mutually assured destruction. Mad. So that's what his policy was, is that essentially we have nuclear warheads. We have just as much, if not more, than the Soviets. If the Soviets want to fight nuclear war, then they will in turn react in kind and send over as many nuclear warheads as possible, destroy the Soviet infrastructure, destroy the Soviet social structure, destroy the economy, destroy everything. As well, we would die as well. Pretty much the whole world will be in chaos. And so that was kind of his idea going into it. But then you also get the idea, well, Joseph McCarthy. So McCarthy, he kind of took the Red Scare to the ultimate level. And so he started, I believe he was a senator at the time. He started persecuting people, persecuting actors and actresses. He started going after, people in politics. He started going after just workers in general, people in the school system who were teaching. And so he would go after anybody who had any kind of lick of any kind of smell of communism. He would go after it. And so people started really buying into it. They were like, oh no, he's actually right. He's really good at like sniffing out all these communists. Maybe he's what we need. So he started gaining more popularity and he ran with it. He started, going towards to like just the tip of the top. And then finally in 54, I believe he was at a meeting with Joseph Welch. So Joseph Welch, he was at this hearing with McCarthy. As McCarthy was going down the line and persecuting all these people, he gets to the military. That didn't sit well with Joseph Welch. So Joseph Welch, he understood that McCarthy was going after people that Joseph Welch also held to a very high standard. So McCarthy's like berating them. They're like, they're communists, they love Soviet Russia. Nikita Khrushchev, he was the person who took over after Stalin, and he was like, yeah, they support him as well. And then Joseph Welch was like, stop right there. Then he uttered the ultimate quote that a lot of you may have heard, especially if you're into history. He goes over to him and he's like, have you no sense of decency, sir? Have you no sense at all? And that was it. That was the nail in the coffin. Everyone applauded. Joseph McCarthy, he ended up losing all his credibility, all his popularity. I believe he also ended up just retiring, and he ended up drinking himself to death. That was the end of Joseph McCarthy. But another guy, though, Roy Cohn. So Roy Cohn was Joseph McCarthy's, was McCarthy's, what was it? He was a, lawyer. So he was his lawyer, and after that whole ordeal and the death of McCarthy came, Roy Cohn was hired by this guy who had this son who was really big into politics. That was later on, though. But this guy, he was like, hey, I have my son. He really needs to learn the ropes of politics in order to further along his career in the U.S. And so Roy Cohn kind of instituted this, any kind of idea or ideology that McCarthy had in order to gain popularity and gain the public's trust. So he used that with this kid, And ultimately, this kid ended up becoming one of the most well known, one of the most wealthy businessmen and political figures, which is now going to be our president as well, Donald Trump at that time. So that's kind of like this little connection that you have between the 50s and 60s up until now. But later on in '59, so as this kind of Red Scare is kind of like winding down and everything, there's still this idea of the spread of communism, and we need to stop that. There's this idea of this battle between Soviet imperialism versus the U.S. Colonialism. You know, kind of like the U.S. needs to take over these different territories and need to protect these different territories, protect them from the Soviets. The Soviets are saying, hey, we need to spread our influence in all these different countries to stop the spread of NATO, because they're going to take over every single country, and we need to protect these countries from that. So now you got these, this spread of everyone. So I do have a map somewhere. I do need to find that. It kind of shows the spread of communism and capitalism throughout the world, democracy, I guess, throughout the whole world. But one thing that does happen is what was it? The Bay of Pigs. And so essentially, I believe JFK became president, and then to kind of like to combat Cuba under Fidel Castro. He at the time was not Fidel Castro. It was Fulgencio Batista. So he was in control of Cuba. Then Russia, or Soviet Russia, was spreading their influence into Cuba. So there was this guy named Fidel Castro who was really big into communist ideals and supported Russia in their movement with the people, bringing the people to power. And so Fidel Castro wanted to take over Cuba. Under JFK, JFK did not want that to happen. So JFK reinforced Cuba, wanted to protect Cuba. And of course, Fidel Castro wasn't having that. So 59, Fidel Castro ended up overthrowing Batista and now becoming the leader of Cuba. So then that was kind of like a massive strike to the gut for JFK. And so that was kind of like the beginning of his presidency, was, this this logistical failure, essentially. So now, this was in hopes of preventing a future invasion as well. So Khrushchev, he started sending over missiles to Cuba to protect them from the U.S. invasion again. And so Khrushchev talked to Castro, and Castro agreed to house house missiles inside of Cuba. So by the 60s, JFK started campaigning for the beginning of his new era. So at this time, you start getting all this segregation. So white only bathrooms, black only bathrooms, white only restaurants, black only restaurants, diners, gas stations, schools. Everything was segregated. That was just how life was. And so JFK called for the new frontier, essentially. He focused on eliminating inequality in the U.S., and he also wanted to create this justice system that was fair and just. But the South did not like that. The South was like, we're not having that. We want the traditional way. We don't want this whole willy-nilly new stuff that's going on. And so at the same time, JFK was also trying to plan for Operation Mongoose. So that was to hopefully try to eliminate communist rule in China as well. He has to fight the social aspects back home, but he also has to fight communism back outside of the U.S. And so this is a constant battle that he's trying to figure out. And so then he gets U.S. Intelligence, in kind of like in 61. 61. The Berlin Wall goes up. So he's like, man, I'm losing this battle. So the Soviets under Nikita Khrushchev, he's now trying to butt heads against the U.S., trying to increase communist power in Europe. So the Berlin Wall goes up in 61, and so the Berlin Wall that encircled West Germany, or Western Europe essentially, Western Berlin, and that cut off basically all Eastern aid to Western Berlin entirely. And so before that, because you get the what was it? You get the Berlin airlift. You also get people who are trying to jump over the line and kind of sneak past the guards to get into Eastern Germany to flee. And so you got two different issues now. Well, four. You got two different issues. You got first you got Western Berlin. Western Berlin, a lot of people are trying to flee that side of Berlin to get to the east. So now you get this loss. You get these people who are now trying to get away from Soviet or communist ideals, communist government, communist rule, and try to go towards the east. So you don't want to keep those people back, but you also, the east now has this rising population. These people, they now have to house people who are now fleeing the country to get into their country. So you get this rise of immigration from Western Berlin to Eastern Berlin, essentially. But now the Berlin Wall goes up. No one could get by. It's just basically the whole entire western side of Berlin is cut off, and so now he now has to figure that out. At the same time, the Cuban Missile Crisis happened in '63. So in '63, U.S. intelligence, they fly over Cuba, take some pictures. The pilot's like, wait a minute, what's going on? They see all these missile sites popping up. And so they're like, this is not good. This is tremendously not good. So he radios back he goes back to to Washington, and he goes back, and then he sends messages. Messages reach the higher ups, which eventually reaches JFK. JFK now sees that there are missiles inside of Cuba. So to increase public demand to invade Cuba, to take back the Cuban power, or to take back power from communist Castro, he needs a way to actually get the public on board with that. So there now newspapers come out saying the MRBMs, or mid-range ballistic missiles, are nuclear. Nuclear warheads are now in Cuba, so they're now within mere miles of the Florida coast of the U.S. And so JFK now rose public scare. Everyone's like, oh no, there's nuclear war is going to happen and everything. Everyone's like really on edge about it. So then JFK now has three options. Three options were brought to his table. So he's got the first option, which was airstrikes. We can airstrike those, and then, finally just invade after that. Full military mobilization. Get this over with as quick as possible to eliminate the chance of nuclear war. Well, if that happens, Fidel Castro is backed by Russia. Castro can now radio back to Russia, hey, I'm being invaded. Russia comes to their aid, nuclear war. Second option, just completely invade Cuba, just not even destroy the missile sites, but just control them militarily. Same thing will happen though. Russia will know, Russia will come to their aid, possible nuclear war. A third way, use political talks as a means with threatening them with nuclear war to scare them. So he has these options where it's either full ground invasion, airstrike, or political means. But JFK was like, let's come up with another one. So then he now comes to the forefront with a letter to Nikita Khrushchev, and says, all right, if you guys return your missiles to Cuba or to Soviet Union, we will not invade Cuba. So he receives no letter. He receives no reply back. So then the U.S. is like, they're not doing it. We don't know what to do. This is not good. So then they up it to DEFCON 1 or DEFCON 3. So DEFCON 3 is going to be where you got military readiness. So everyone's just like on edge. The military's like, hey, we're ready for war. This is not good. They're not replying to anyone. And so U.S. intelligence comes back and they're just like, yeah, the missiles are not moving. We don't know what's going on. And so Khrushchev sends another letter. He's like, this is an act of aggression if you want to create an embargo. Sorry. So DEFCON 3 created a naval embargo on Cuba. And so after that, Khrushchev sends back another letter saying, hey, this is not good. We will strike you with these nuclear missiles if you so happen to continue this embargo. Well, then JFK's like, we're prepared to fire. We're prepared to die. Are you? So then this goes up to DEFCON 2. So DEFCON 2 is like increased military readiness. And so he is now at the forefront of this is going to happen. Nuclear war will happen. So the different DEFCONs. So I got written down and everything for you too. Here's this. So I don't know if hopefully you can read it. So basically, you got normal civilian life. So that's DEFCON 5. That's where we're at right now, essentially. Then you got the DEFCON 4. That's intel. So increased military intel on any nuclear missile sites, any territory that's threatened with nuclear warfare. Then you got military readiness for DEFCON 3. So DEFCON 3 was just essentially the naval embargo of Cuba at that point, just to make sure no additional nuclear supplies are getting into that country. Then you got DEFCON 2. So DEFCON 2 was towards the end of that missile crisis where pretty much nuclear war was imminent. It was going to happen. And then DEFCON 1 is essentially nuclear war is happening. It's going to happen. They just need to push that red button and then all hell breaks loose, essentially. So if you guys wanted to write that down and everything, I will hopefully post some of that in the modules tab and get you guys some info on the different DEFCON levels. So it's not something you guys have to know. It's just something that's kind of cool to know, kind of like later on. Not saying that it's going to happen, but if it does happen, then you already know. If you see, oh, we're at DEFCON 3, then you're just like, oh, military readiness. Okay. But yeah, essentially that's kind of how the whole DEFCONs go. So then, there we go. Put this down here. So, now essentially, October 26th comes along and a Soviet agent comes to the U.S. and, ABC News, and then they deliver a message saying, hey, Nikita Khrushchev is willing to talk about this. He's willing to talk it over. And then that was in the morning. So we're waiting. The whole country's kind of waiting on what's going to happen. Is this going to be war? Are they going to reach an agreement and everything? So Khrushchev later on sends over a letter to JFK saying that, hey, let's just look. Nuclear war is imminent. We do not want to be into this thermonuclear holocaust, essentially. And then he was like, let us untie these knots. Let us be the people of change. Let's just be new. Let's not be the people of FDR and Stalin, Truman, who want nuclear war, who want to enforce that power. Let's be the change. And so JFK is like, all right, that's fine. So then October 27th, Khrushchev explains that he wants all U.S. nuclear missiles removed from Turkey. And then he will remove missiles from, from Cuba. So there's 2 letters. Two letters. So then JFK, he makes a gamble. So politics is all about chess, essentially. He makes a gamble. It'll either reply to both or just reply to one. So the U.S., they don't want to get rid of any nuclear power, but he needs a way to de-escalate the situation. So he makes a gamble and he tries to reply to the first letter. The first letter saying, hey, all right, let's change. Let's kind of de escalate the situation. He doesn't reply to the second one. So the first one was essentially, all right, we will remove our missiles from Cuba if that de escalates the situation, essentially. So, as well, Robert Kennedy, his brother, meets with the Soviet ambassador and says that, hey, we'll remove our missiles from Turkey if you guys continue on with this. So the Soviet ambassador goes back to Khrushchev and says, like, hey, they're going to remove their missiles from Turkey. So Khrushchev was like, all right, cool. At the same time, a hotline was put inside the White House at that point to eliminate any situation like this ever again. Missiles were removed from Cuba, for the Soviet Union. The ones in Turkey, they stayed there. Stayed there till like later on in life, I believe. They weren't removed till a little bit longer after but yeah, so we kept our missiles in Turkey during that time. But honestly, JFK won out. He played the game and he won. And so then that was all in 263. And so yeah, he essentially he did his thing. But that was short lived. Now, because of this whole communist rise or Red Scare inside the U.S., there were some people who were affiliated with these communist ideals, i.e., Lee Oswald, Harvey Lee Oswald. So, Oswald was, now this is all through readings and stuff like that, so just take this for what you will. You can also do your own research and kind of see what your take is on this, essentially. But so Lee Oswald was, or Harvey Oswald was, growing. He supported communist ideals and everything, and so now there was this issue where it's like, JFK at this point did rub some politicians the wrong way. And so they needed a way to kind of get into this war with the Soviet Union to kind of drive back communism. So Lee Oswald was given an ultimatum. If you kill the president, you have sanctuary in Cuba. Or, I believe it's Cuba. Yeah. And so, got a passport and everything. Like, he was ready to go. And so then, in Dallas, Texas, JFK did a tour, in his limousine, and he asked for the agents, his the Secret Service, or basically his agents, to step back. So they were all behind his car, and he wanted everyone to see him. So he and Jackie Kennedy were in the car. They were kind of like going along and everything. And then, finally, once they reached, I believe, the depository, a shot rang out. And actually, there's a few shots. So one of them hit the governor, I believe the governor, in the front seat. So that one, I believe, I want to say hit his shoulder or something like that. But he kind of doubles over. Another one hits Kennedy in the throat. So he kind of like just hunches over. He kind of like hunches over towards Jackie. Jackie at this point has no idea what's going on. It's just all in quick succession. So she's kind of like starstruck. She's like, "What's going on?" And as soon as he doubles over, the final shot hits him in the head. Explodes everywhere, just blood goes everywhere. His skull is literally on the limousine trunk. She screams, jumps over, grabs out of just pure instinct and just and shock. She grabs his skull, climbs back into the cabin, tries to put his head back together as the limousine is hauling ass to the hospital. And so then finally Oswald was arrested, and he was charged with the murder of the president and everything. And I believe Jack Ruby. So Jack Ruby was there as well. Jack Ruby was waiting on Oswald, who was now being led to be detained, and Jack Ruby turned around, shot Oswald dead. Now, there is growing speculation that Jack Ruby was affiliated with the mafia, and the mafia had all these ties because the Chicago mafia had ties to JFK, or the Kennedys, and kind of like close relations with them. But that was all conspiracy stuff. So like, if you like conspiracies, then there you go. There's conspiracy for you. But essentially, the bottom line is Oswald was shot and killed before we could hear the exact truth of the matter. Now, he was captured at the, I believe at his, I believe at his home or something like that. He was caught like 30 minutes later, trying to leave. But he was seen in the depository getting coffee the time that he was shot. But in the upstairs room with a bunch of boxes was the rifle that he used to shoot. Was a German, I believe a German rifle. I can't say off the top of my head. But essentially, they said that that was the gun used to shoot Kennedy from the book depository. Now, it was declassified just recently, I believe like last year, 2024 or so, that in fact, the shot rang from the grassy knoll, which was a hill by an overpass. It was basically the overpass right where the limousine was passing under. That's where the shots rang out. And so, 3 shots, they were all triangulated, and essentially this was the plan that they wanted to implement to kill Fidel Castro. Was a triangulated shot, 3 shots would ring out, at least one of them would hit and kill Fidel Castro. They used the same method on JFK, according to conspiracy and all that. But essentially, bottom line is, the grassy knoll is where the shots rang out. All that info was declassified last year, so you can definitely take a look at it, read up on it. All that was kind of like established last year. So basically, he's dead. So Jackie Kennedy is still wearing the bloodstained clothes. She's like in shock of what happened. On board Sam 6000, which was Kennedy's plane, Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in. He was sworn in. You can now see that plane at the Air Force Museum. Little shameless plug. Come visit Air Force Museum. I'll be working. But that's where I work part-time especially. So, yeah. So he was given the presidency on board of the CM2 6000, which was a 707. That was Air Force One. The paint scheme was created by Jackie herself, which is now used in every single other Air Force One since then. So that kind of like light blue or royal blue colorway, gold colorway, Jackie Kennedy. Yeah, so I digress. She's still in the bloodstained clothes. Lyndon B. Johnson is now president. Also, at this time, they now have to take his body back to Dallas. So they take out, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, they take out the rear back 2 seats of Air Force One, and then after that, Jackie Kennedy sat right next to him in the seats right next to him. And then it's a whole funeral procession. The whole world is at a standstill. They don't know what. They're in shock. Totally misbelief that kind of like the starstruck, the youngest president of the United States, wasn't even able to finish his term before he was shot and killed. And so then Lyndon B. Johnson, he called for this, he's pushed for this great society. So he paved the way for programs like Medicare, Medicaid, stuff like that. The National Organization of Women, which was headed by, spearheaded by Betty Friedan. So that helped protect and fight for the rights for women. Then you also get the Job Corps, which trains citizens to get into the workforce, to get jobs and stuff like that, to eradicate homelessness. So he tried his best to focus on the public and everything. And so he also passed the Civil Rights Act. So the '60s was kind of like the spearhead of, of the civil rights movement. It was kind of like at its worst, essentially. And so you got the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which prohibited segregation in public areas. So private dwellings, private establishments, private businesses, that is fine. That is your right to discriminate. It is your right to say, hey, I don't want these kinds of people I don't want to do business with these kinds of people. That is fine. In a public area, though, that doesn't fly. And so he wanted to really pin that down. So then he also has to fight the Vietnam War. So after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, where the USS Maddox was attacked by torpedo boats, which gave the U.S. the right to invade Vietnam. That's what happens. The Gulf of Tonkin resolution now gave Lyndon B. Johnson ultimate power to attack Vietnam. So that's what he does. Full mobilization. By 64, 30,000 troops were in Vietnam, but then by 67, 600,000 troops were in Vietnam. And so this is a real case of Vietnam War starts. There you go. But so Rolling Thunder commenced, and so there was about a 2-year aerial bombardment with like B-52s, F-104s, everything, F-101, Voodoos and stuff like F-100s, and so it's just full scale attack, and so then that's when you get to 1965 Battle of La Drang. And so Battle of La Drang was when the North Vietnamese wanted to infiltrate the South Vietnamese territories, split them in half through the Central Highlands. So then the first U.S. cavalry, basically the air mobile, they were sent in to protect the South Vietnamese territories. And so then, there we go. We're gonna do this real quick. So then you got. Oh, over that real quick. This is kind of like a rough little thing. North Vietnamese, South Vietnam. Got the Highlands. Also, if you guys ever seen Highland cows, they're really cute, furry and cute. So North Vietnamese, they wanted to come in and attack the Highlands and split them in half. So South Vietnamese. So split them in half. All right. So is a basic draft or basic rundown of it. So it's not how it all looks, but basic rundown. So the North Vietnamese, they want to infiltrate the South Vietnam territories, and so then split them in half. So then you got East and West, and so the Eastern South Vietnamese were cut off with any support from the Western South Vietnamese forces, which were also cut off from the South. And so now you get the spread of territory where the North Vietnamese can now come in. Now, the U.S., they mobilize a bunch of troops to come in and support and kind of like break it up in the middle. That's an issue. So, that's where you get places such as, what was it? Was it LZ, like the X-ray? Yeah. So, basically at X-ray, there's these troops that were sent in through UH-1 Iroquois, which were those Huey gunships, with it was just the usual videos of all those green helicopters riding in. Flight of Valkyries are playing. Creedence Clearwater. They're playing their music. And so that's when they come in. They drop the troops down. And then they finally start shooting everything. It's all haywire. The issue, though, is that they're now surrounded. They drop him inside the LZ, the landing zone, and they're completely surrounded by just trees and brush, And they have North Vietnamese firing from every single direction. They're pinned down. Death is just climbing astronomically on both sides. And so then they finally, for 3 days, they had to deal with this. And then ultimately, they get the North Vietnamese to retreat back to the North Vietnam side. You also get troops from the U.S. are now getting airstrikes coming in. B-52s are completely laying waste to the countryside, taking out all these North Vietnamese troops here and there. So by the end of it, about 3,500, I believe, North Vietnamese troops are taken out, as opposed to 500 or so, give or take, U.S. troops. And so that's kind of like the U.S. baptism by fire, essentially. And so then there's other things to take away from it, like close quarters combat was a serious issue with the U.S. because they're so used to fighting over kind of like miles, and with the 105 howitzer, with artillery strikes, air strikes, for the enemy to come right up on you, big issue. But they got it worked out. And so then the North Vietnamese, though, they figured out a way to kind of combat and figure out a way to kind of like, kind of deal with airstrikes, deal with the U.S. way of fighting, and change up their tactics. So then that'll continue on throughout the whole Vietnam War, essentially. And so now at this point, though, you get, public opinion about it. It's kind of 50-50, but there's no real animosity towards Vietnam War at this point, though. But then also this same year, Winston Churchill also dies. So you get this kind of end of an era of these World War II veterans and these people who are really headstrong about driving the workforce during a war. They're all dead. FDR is dead. Stalin is dead. Winston Churchill finally passes away. All those military leaders are all gone now. So you got this new age of people. At the same time, when I go back home, civil rights. The civil rights movement kind of takes a toll. And so when, you got all these sit-ins, 1960s, you got the Greensboro sit-in. 1961, you got the Freedom Rides, where interstates, highways are now segregated. So you got these people who are going against the system and driving along these segregated highways. You get the bus boycotts. You get the March on Washington, where MLK marches to spread awareness for African American rights. That's where he makes the speech. That I have a dream. That that children will be not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. You get that, and you also get the March on Selma. That one in '65. Selma, that was a really dangerous one where this protest for black rights to vote. They marched about 54 miles, and then ultimately they ended up coming to a spearhead where you got white social groups. You also have white authorities who stopped them. They started attacking them. And so now you get this widespread, you got dogs running after African Americans and biting them, ripping them apart. You also got people who are getting shot at. You got hoses from the fire department hosing them down. And those hoses, they're powerful. At the least, they're shooting out 75 psi of water. If you ever gotten shot with 75 psi water, it hurts a lot. And so, yeah, you get all this violence, this racial violence going on, and then this spreads worldwide because of anger from the public about what happens at Selma. And so all this growing animosity, but then you got a major change. 67, Summer of Love. There you go. You know, you got all these hippies coming out, all these guys coming back, either back from the Vietnam War, or also people who have family in the Vietnam War. You know, African Americans who wanted to just love, and just kind of like get things over with. They're kind of brought in by these social groups who want to just love. You know, political figures kind of get out of the limelight. They retire or they leave office, and they just want things to be okay. And so you got the spread of the hippie movement, where they want to spread love, you know, and spread awareness that the Vietnam War isn't the way to go. Because now at this point, people are going to the Vietnam. They're taking photojournalists are taking pictures. Writers from newspaper articles, you know, newscasters are going out there, and they're documenting the war. So this is the first time that war is widespread documented and shown in real time. And so this spreads this awareness that, hey, this is not good. We're not doing well right now. And so we get the Tet Offensive. And so the Vietnamese New Year. So, or that's, well, Tet, essentially. Tet. It's like a big celebration. Comes January 30th. So then the North Vietnamese, they're going to be like, you know what? We're going to figure out a way to really curtail public opinion about this war. So then they waited. It was a major surprise offensive that was conducted by the North Vietnamese on all South Vietnamese cities, U.S. installations, what have you. And this actually contradicted what Lyndon B. Johnson said, was that they were winning the war. They were making headway. The war will be finished at any point in time. But then you get the Tet Offensive. You get a major North Vietnamese push on South Vietnam, and you get all these U.S. Americans, U.S. Soldiers who were ambushed, South Vietnamese soldiers who were ambushed. And so ultimately, the North Vietnamese retreated, but this came at the cost of 3,000 South Vietnamese civilians. And there's 25 days of this attack. The U.S. Embassy, the U.S. Embassy down there was attacked and was lost. The fall of Saigon happened. And so then the Battle of Hue was also the bloodiest battle of the entire Vietnam War, I believe. So it was attacked for political importance to actually drive the political opinion of the war in the North Vietnamese side. So they tried to overtake the South Vietnamese government because that Hue was, I believe, the capital of that area. And so ultimately it was a political success. Even though the North Vietnamese did retreat, public opinion hated the Vietnam War at this point. So at this point, 2,000 U.S. casualties, 13,000 civilians died. The whole entire city was completely ransacked, burned to the ground essentially. And public opinion was just like, we want out. We want to pull our troops out. What's going on? We're not winning this war. This war is useless. We can't be in this much longer. So that's what happens. Public opinion sucked. They hated the Vietnam War. And so then you get all these rising of kind of revolts. Not revolts. You got all these public demonstrations. All these opinions that the Vietnam War needs to stop. It needs to end. And then by 68, I believe, you also get another tragedy. So MLK, really big figure, April 8th, he goes to he's in Memphis, Tennessee, at this motel. He was going to do a speech, and so the day before, on April 7th, he's talking to his cohorts in his office, and he tells them that, hey, I want this song played at the end of my service and everything. And so they're like, yeah, yeah, all right, cool. Before he goes to bed. So the next morning, he goes out. He's just hanging out with them, and he goes to the balcony. And then as soon as he goes to the balcony, shot in the head. So he falls to the ground. He's trying to breathe, can't breathe, and all. He's the death rattles essentially. They all get up and they point to where the shot came through. It came through the window on the other side. And then the guy was ultimately arrested. I can't remember for the life of me his name. But essentially, yeah, the guy was arrested, charged with the murder of MLK. So you got death of another major civil rights figure. And at the same time, Robert Kennedy at that time announces the death of MLK to the public when he's doing his speeches, because he heard pretty much that day, I believe, of what happened. And he also advocates for civil rights. And so you have all these political figures who are super popular. They want to drive home civil rights and equality for all African Americans. And so then, also, that song that he requested for his cohorts to play at his service after his speech was going to happen, they played at his funeral. So MLK ultimately got his wish. And so then, that was in April. So, just 2 months later, Robert Kennedy's doing this speech in California because he's rising to fame. He might actually become the next president of the United States at this point. So, got two things. All right, so here was the common conception. Saran, he was kind of like a radical idealist. He didn't like Kennedy's ideas, so he wanted to get rid of him. He was kind of like a crazed... Actually, no. Sorry. I take that back. He was a crazed fan. So that's what it was. So he loved Kennedy to death. And so he believed that, if Kennedy doesn't get the presidency, no one can. But ultimately, Kennedy, after finishing his speech, he takes a detour. So instead of walking through the public, he goes through the kitchen. Well, who was waiting for him? Saran. So he ends up shooting him several times. And so I believe I want to say most of them hit right in the chest or the stomach. And so then Robert Kennedy ends up passing away right on the spot. And now public opinion is just like, all these guys are dying. What the heck is going on? So just complete turmoil is going over in the U.S. And so then that's when ultimately he kind of Robert Kennedy's death actually brings about this change in in politics. They create this giant animosity and this separation in politics between the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats are blaming the Republicans. The Republicans are blaming the Democrats. All this animosity kind of heightens, and it just keeps growing. And that's where we get to today, where there's just this growing separation of politics and everything. And so then, by January of the following year, Nixon is president. He becomes president. He promises to end the Vietnam War honorably and swiftly and end the bloodshed. What happens? It keeps going. So, August 15th through the 18th, there was, the Vietnam War is still going on and everything, but back home, there's this idea that, hey, we need to bring the world together. And so what does the public do? Woodstock happens. So Woodstock is just this announcement, where hey, we're gonna be having a concert, just just a cool concert, everyone can show up, just have a good time. Well, people all across the country travel. You got hitchhikers, coming in. You got, people taking off school, taking off work, just bringing their whole families, bringing vans full of friends and just strangers, hopping on board, just tagging along. And so by the time it goes on for 3 days, 400,000 people are around. They're just vibing. People like Jimi Hendrix, Grateful Dead, what was it? Janis Joplin, Jefferson Airplane, Creedence Clearwater. They're playing all this music, and so everyone's just vibing out. Rain or shine. People are like making food and handing them out to people. It's just love, all around. And so then, essentially, it becomes one of the greatest rock concerts or concerts of all time, music festivals of all time. I believe at the same time, Altamont was another one that wanted to happen, but I believe that was a disaster because I believe the Hells Angels were there, and then ultimately this fight broke out, and then I believe someone or a few people might have died. But essentially, Altamont and Woodstock were two major music festivals at that time. So then that's when you get to the 70's. So that's when 1970 was a Kent State demonstration. Kent State demonstration essentially was this moment where, students wanted to publicly express their concerns with the Vietnam War. And so then the Coast Guard, I believe, the Coast Guard comes in, and they kind of try to put down this, uprising essentially at Kent State, Ohio. And so then students are still demonstrating, it's peaceful. It's just a peaceful protest. But the presence of these guys kind of erupt, kind of like make the students kind of like, get uneasy a little bit. And so these guys point their rifles at them. And so that does not settle well. Tear gas is thrown and everything. And finally, when the students are calling out, these two guys, or these two Coast Guard soldiers, they point their guns over, and then they rack it and everything. They're ready to go. But then they're like, wait a minute. So then, from eyewitness accounts, these guys turn around. They hear something. From their commanding officer, they turn around to face the students again. They just open fire. So then, by the end of it, 9 ended up being injured, 4 were killed, and that ruined the relationship between the U.S. military and the civilians, students. So student activism kind of like grew from this incident, but also the growing separation between law enforcement and the U.S. military and the public happened at this time as well. And so further along at this point as well, I'm going to stop there, especially because it's also the 70's and it'll go into the 80's. But yeah, that's kind of like where it came out of spearhead, was going to be at Kent State shooting. And the assassination of MLK, JFK, and Robert Kennedy, literally all within the same era. All within the same 5-year period, too. And so, so that's going to be the 50s, 60s, 70s. And so, into the 70s. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to make sure that the 70s and 80s are up as fast as possible. I hope you guys enjoy your July 4th and hope you guys stayed safe. There's a lot of random people running around, drunk driving and stuff like that. Just don't do that. Just have fun. Enjoy your family. Stay safe with the fireworks. But, if you want to shoot off fireworks, go for it. Have your fun. Have your time with your family. It's a time to just celebrate the struggle of independence against, the British rule. It's a fight against, kind of like we want to be on our own, and we got it. We got our chance to actually live out and become a country of, we try to express freedom and liberty amongst people. We've have our issues, which I have explained, with the civil rights, with feminism, and with activists here and there growing and trying to fight to protect what America actually stood for initially, was freedom and the available or ability to for Americans to express themselves. If you want to express your own religion, go for it. If you want to express your own, creativity, go for it. And that's what we essentially stood for, was just, love and just being ourselves, and giving people the opportunity to be themselves. So yeah, so that's just what this independence stood for. But anyways, I digress. Just have fun with it. I'm about to go get my registration done at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, and hopefully have my car registered by the end of the day. We'll see. But yeah, there's my cat. He's sleeping. Well, his name's Oscar, aka Potato, because he looks like a potato. He's fat, super fat, loves food. But yeah, that's the end of my lecture for the day, and so hopefully you guys enjoyed it. 60s and 70s are a really tough time. 50s, 60s, 70s. But it's a really important time. It's basically where America reaches this point where the old era ends and the new era begins. So that's my spiel. Hope you guys take care and just enjoy yourselves. And Bob's your uncle. Have a good time. Take care.